The tale kicks off when James McCord, a tough but quiet sheriff, rides into a dusty little town tucked away in Nevada. He's not there for sightseeing or visiting old friends. He's come for something much heavier. His own brother, Thomas, was found dead, and not just dead, murdered in a brutal way that left whispers all over town. James originally shows up burning with revenge, ready to put a bullet in whoever took his brother's life. But as he stays longer, that thirst for vengeance starts to shift into something bigger, a need to clean up this rotten place and get justice, not just for Thomas, but for everyone who's been living in fear. Back before all this bloodshed, Thomas McCord was the town's preacher, a gentle soul, always speaking about forgiveness and faith, though his life was far from peaceful. The town's mayor, Pierce, ruled like a tyrant, with a pack of violent goons ready to do his bidding. Every day, Thomas stood on that church pulpit knowing he was surrounded by snakes. The church was the only place where he could breathe without looking over his shoulder, and even then, he spent many evenings tucked away inside, writing letters to his distant brother James. James had long branded Thomas a coward, because when war came, Thomas had refused to fight. It had been 3 years since the Civil War ended, but its shadow still hung over everything, like the smell of smoke that never fades. In every letter, Thomas begged James to come help him. He wrote about the corruption, about the fear choking the town, about how he had taken a stand for what's right and was paying dearly for it. One quiet afternoon, as Thomas was halfway through another letter, the church doors creaked open. In stepped Jenny, a local prostitute with tired eyes and a fragile hope. She confessed she was done with her old life and just wanted to start over. Thomas listened with calm kindness and told her that God always sides with those trying to do good. His words softened her like warm sunlight, and she broke down, hugging him like someone clinging to the last bit of hope they had. But that little moment of peace didn't last. Rebbe, one of Mayor Pierce's favorite attack dogs, barged in with fury in his eyes. He mocked Thomas, spat out insults, and made it clear that Jenny wasn't allowed to leave her old life, and that Thomas had no business meddling in the mayor's affairs. Thomas didn't lift a hand to fight back. Rebbe pummeled him with fists and rage while Jenny screamed. And the cruelty didn't stop there. Later that night, Rebbe and his crew locked Thomas inside his own church, set it on fire, and stood outside laughing as the flames consumed everything. From a distance, Mayor Pierce watched, arms folded, lips curled in satisfaction. The blazing church wasn't just a murder. It was a warning to anyone else who might dare defy him. Days passed. Then, cutting through the desert like a ghost, came a lone rider. It was James. His jaw was clenched like stone, and he had one thing on his mind: make the people who killed his brother regret ever breathing. As soon as he arrives, James sees a mob of thugs getting ready to whip a black man tied to a post. Calmly, like he's swatting a fly, James tells them the war is over, that this kind of hatred already lost. They laugh in his face. One snarls that the war ends only when they say it does. James' eyes don't even twitch. He pulls both pistols and shoots the hat clean off one man's head. The silence afterward is deafening. The gang freezes. James tells them to get back on their horses before they end up at the wrong end of his gun. They scatter like frightened rats, and the man they were about to whip, who says his name is Abraham, thanks James with trembling hands. Word spreads fast. The preacher's brother is back, and he's not just any man. He's a former soldier, now wearing the star of U.S. Marshal. That night, he steps into the local saloon. A few drunk troublemakers try to provoke him over his hat. James doesn't even blink. He lifts his pistol onto the bar and asks if they're really ready to die over something so stupid. Their faces go pale, and they quickly back down. Even the bar owner, who's been walking on eggshells for years, looks relieved. The bar owner quietly leads James to the charred skeleton of the church. He warns him not to expect much. The fire had devoured everything. But James kneels in the ashes anyway, like he's trying to hear his brother's voice in the silence. Meanwhile, Pierce gets word from his right-hand man, Heg, that James is in town. Pierce smirks, pretending not to care, joking maybe accidents just run in the McCord family. But under that fake grin, he's already thinking about how to get rid of James before he causes trouble. At the burnt ruins, a woman named Melissa appears. She was close to Thomas, and she leads James to his brother's fresh grave on the edge of town. James stands there for a long time, head bowed, whispering that he's sorry for not coming sooner. He swears he'll carry on Thomas's fight. Thomas used words to battle evil. James will use bullets. Melissa sees that look in his eyes, cold, determined, and it shakes her. She tells him about Pierce's dark history. Before the Civil War, Pierce made his fortune smuggling enslaved people. When the war started, instead of running, he gathered up a band of ex-Confederates and turned them into his private army. With them, he seized a mayor's seat and never let go. Now, they keep the whole town in chains, just invisible ones. Melissa gives James what little survived the fire: Thomas's wedding ring, their mother's necklace, an old childhood photo, and a diary she never knew existed. James spends half the night flipping through it. Hidden in those pages is something huge. Thomas had discovered Pierce was secretly using an abandoned mine to smuggle weapons. The next day, James walks through the town and truly sees how rotten it is. Black residents are treated like dirt. Women are harassed openly. No one dares speak up. He steps in when he sees a group of men threatening a woman in the street, breaking up the scene with nothing more than a cold stare and a steady gun hand. People watch from windows, shocked that anyone would dare stand up to Pierce's men. Later at the saloon, James meets Captain Lewis, a U.S. Army officer who's also been quietly investigating Pierce. Lewis wants justice. James wants revenge. They strike an uneasy truce, agreeing to work together. But Lewis warns they need real proof, not just good intentions or angry bullets. That night, James quietly maps out the mine's location and gives the map to Melissa. He tells her if he doesn't return, she must deliver it to Captain Lewis. At the same time, Pierce was sitting in his fancy parlor like a vulture, sipping whiskey and grinning while Hegg reported the news. The moment he heard James McCord's name, his grin vanished. He growled that this new hero couldn't be allowed to mess with his business. When Hegg asked how to handle him, Pierce coldly said he'd send men to shadow James, but not the usual bumbling idiots. He wanted quiet eyes on the man. If James became a threat, Pierce himself would handle it. That night, James crept out to the location from the journal. The place looked abandoned, but inside he found crates full of rifles, pistols, and gold bars stamped with markings from all over the country, proof that Pierce had been looting and smuggling on a grand scale. While James was still inspecting the stash, he heard boots crunching on gravel outside. Pierce's men had tracked him. He slipped behind a stack of crates, holding his breath as they entered. One careless step gave him away, and the hiding game ended in an instant. Gunfire tore through the dark. Bullets hit barrels and crates, setting off sparks. James fought like a cornered wolf, taking them down one by one. The chaos ended in a thunderous blast when one of the crates packed with dynamite exploded, swallowing the whole place in fire and smoke. James stumbled out alive, barely, with soot on his face and evidence stuffed in his saddlebag. Back in town, Pierce was informed of the explosion. He didn't yet know James had been there, but something else caught his attention. Rumors that an allied mayor was heading toward the region with soldiers, talking about reviving the glory of the Old South. The idea of reigniting the Civil War made Pierce's eyes light up like a gambler seeing a full house. But then someone mentioned James had been spotted heading north. Some of Pierce's men thought maybe the marshal had run off. Hegg didn't buy it. He knew James was too stubborn to run and demanded more money for the risk of hunting him. Pierce's fake smile cracked. Without a word, he slowly slid a pistol under the table and aimed it at Hegg's gut, warning him never to mistake himself for an equal. "Don't bite the hand that feeds you," he hissed, "or you'll die starving." Hegg's face went pale. He backed down. After the tension cooled, Pierce ordered him to get rid of James quietly, make it look like an accident. James, meanwhile, returned to Melissa's house, bruised and exhausted. He laid out what he'd found: the stolen weapons, the gold, the proof that Pierce was planning something enormous. He admitted this wasn't just about revenge anymore. If Pierce wasn't stopped, innocent people would die. Melissa begged him to go to Captain Lewis with the evidence. James agreed. When Lewis saw the haul, he admitted it was strong proof, but warned they still needed a direct link tying Pierce to it all. While Lewis and James planned their next move, Hegg got word that the secret stash had been blown up. Enraged, he shot one of his own men in front of the others just to remind them what failure cost. That night, Jenny, desperate and trembling, came to James. She whispered that she had critical information and begged him to meet her in a barn outside town. Against his better judgment, James followed. The moment he stepped inside, he knew it was a trap. Hegg's men swarmed out of the shadows. Jenny couldn't even look him in the eye as they knocked him down and dragged him to Hegg. Hegg wanted to kill him on the spot, but Pierce's instructions were clear: give him one chance. Hegg sneered and told James to ride out and never come back. James spat blood and refused. The beating that followed was merciless. They left him broken in the dirt, warning that if he ever returned, bullets would be waiting. Half dead, James crawled back to Melissa's place. She stayed up all night, cleaning his wounds, tears streaking her face. She told him she didn't want to watch another McCord die. James muttered that he wasn't Thomas. Thomas had tried to fight evil with kindness and sermons, and it got him burned alive. James fought with lead and steel. Something changed between them during those nights. Melissa, haunted by her own regrets, found herself drawn closer to him, even as she feared where his path led. While James recovered, Pierce tried to tighten his grip. Thinking James was out of the way, he appointed Haig as the new sheriff and promised him a high position once Pierce became Western Regional President after the coming war. Haig puffed up with pride, wearing the badge like a trophy. But James was still in town, quietly moving in the shadows. He kept his distance from Melissa, knowing from Thomas's diary that she had once loved his brother. It only got worse when Haig, now wearing the sheriff's badge, arrested James on false charges of trying to assault Jenny. He dragged James into the square in broad daylight. The whole town gathered as Haig mocked him, claiming even Thomas had been a snake like this. James yelled that he was a U.S. Marshal and they'd pay for this, but no one dared move. Melissa stood frozen, heartbroken. Pierce watched from the balcony, pretending he was protecting the town's women while secretly enjoying every second. He even began openly flirting with Melissa, telling her she deserved a real man. Jenny, sick with guilt, tried to run away from town that night, but Haig caught her and beat her bloody. Pierce threw James in jail and quietly signed an order for his execution. Melissa, desperate, went to her father, Mr. Collins, and begged him to help. Collins gathered the townsfolk at the burned church, the same place Thomas had died. Melissa stood before them and poured out her heart. She confessed how they all stayed silent when Thomas begged for help, how fear had chained them. She begged them to stand up this time, to redeem themselves. Slowly, one man spoke, then another. Former slaves, farmers, shopkeepers, all of them stepped forward. "It's time we stop being scared," one shouted. That night, they stormed the jail. James had already overpowered a guard but couldn't escape. The key was with Haig. Benjamin, the father of a boy James had once saved, smashed the lock with a hammer and chisel. Alarms rang. Pierce's thugs closed in from all sides. James told the others to run while he covered them. Bullets riddled the walls. When the smoke cleared, Haig himself walked out and ordered everyone to stop firing. He wanted to kill James personally. As Melissa raced to find Captain Lewis, James stepped out with his gun lowered. He offered to surrender if Collins and Benjamin were spared. Haig made him drop his belt, his rifle, everything. Then he taunted James, bragging that Thomas had been brave but still burned like dry wood. That broke something inside James. In a blur, he drew and fired. Chaos erupted. Collins and Benjamin joined the fight. When James was nearly overwhelmed, Benjamin tackled the gunman to save him and was shot through the chest. He died in James's arms, whispering that it was worth it. Right then, Lewis and his soldiers stormed in, forcing Pierce's men to surrender. Haig fled into the night. James chased him to the ruins of the church. There, cornered among the blackened beams, Haig admitted he had admired Thomas's courage, even envied it, and begged for mercy. James's face turned to stone. "Mercy died with my brother," he said, and pulled the trigger. Haig fell, impaled on the broken cross that once stood above the altar. It was like the town itself had judged him. Meanwhile, Lewis and his men raided the mine and arrested Pierce, dragging him out in chains. After the dust settled, James visited his brother's grave one last time. He stood there silently, then rode to Melissa's house. For the first time, he kissed her and asked her to come south with him. Melissa smiled sadly and said she couldn't. Her place was here, rebuilding the church and helping the town heal. James tipped his hat, promised to return someday, and rode off into the fading light, leaving behind a town finally free of its chains.